I used to believe that my life was under control. I was successful, driven, and admired. My office walls were decorated with awards. My phone constantly buzzed with messages of congratulations. People looked at me and saw someone who had it all together. But deep down, I knew better. I was running constantly chasing something that I couldn't quite grasp. And no matter how fast I ran, that emptiness never seemed to fade. It wasn't always this way. In my early years, I thought success would bring me peace, so I made a plan. Work hard, be the best, prove everyone wrong. And one day I'd finally feel complete. But that day never came. And instead, every promotion or every compliment felt like pouring water into a broken vase. It just wouldn't hold. One evening after another long day at the office, I found myself at a local bar. It wasn't my usual scene, but I needed something to break the routine. That's when I saw him, Ethan. We hadn't seen each other since college, but he looked just the same, calm, collected, and somehow content. I almost didn't recognize him because of how peaceful he looked. We exchanged stories, laughed about old times, and I told him about my life, how everything was finally falling into place. Ethan listened, nodding politely, his gaze steady and almost piercing. And then he asked me a question that would change everything. "Are you happy?" I stuttered, not expecting the bluntness. Of course, I replied, forcing a smile. "I mean, I have a great job, a nice apartment, people respect me." Ethan leaned back, his eyes never leaving mine. "But are you happy?" he repeated. His words echoed in my head louder than the bar's music. I didn't know how to answer. For the first time, I realized I had no idea. Ethan noticed my hesitation and spoke softly. "Sometimes we mistake control for happiness," he said. "We think that if we manage every detail, if we're always on top of things, we'll find peace. But real peace doesn't come from control, it comes from acceptance." Acceptance? That word felt foreign. "Wasn't success supposed to be the answer?" Ethan continued. "You seem to be running from something. It's like you're trying to fill a space that can't be filled with achievements or accolades." I couldn't help but feel exposed, like he could see through every carefully constructed layer of my life. "What are you trying to prove?" he asked, his voice gentle but direct. I shrugged it off, laughing awkwardly. "I'm just ambitious. That's all." But even as I said it, I knew it was a lie. Ambition wasn't driving me, it was fear. Fear of being seen as a failure, fear of being ordinary, fear of being forgotten. But I couldn't admit that to Ethan. I couldn't even admit it to myself. That night, his words wouldn't leave me. They wrapped around my thoughts, squeezing tighter with every passing minute. Control acceptance was my entire life, just a series of desperate attempts to prove that I was worthy. Worthy of what? Love, respect, my father's approval. I remembered growing up in a house where mistakes were unacceptable. My father would remind me again and again that being second best was the same as losing. So I learned to excel, to be the best at everything. It wasn't enough to do well, I had to dominate. And somehow along the way, I convinced myself that dominance equated to happiness. I texted Ethan the next day. We met at a park where he often sat to read. I asked him to explain what he meant by acceptance. He didn't lecture me or quote philosophy. Instead, he pointed to a tree nearby. "Look at that branch," he said. "It's twisted, rough, and not symmetrical. But it's part of the whole tree, and the tree wouldn't be complete without it. Your flaws, your fears, they're part of you. You can't just prune away the parts you don't like." I stared at the branch, trying to see what he saw. To me, it still looked broken out of place, but Ethan's point lingered. Maybe I had spent my whole life trying to prune away my imperfections, hiding them behind my accomplishments. Maybe my relentless pursuit of success was just another way to deny who I really was. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, replaying our conversation. I couldn't escape the realization that I had been living in fear, afraid to be seen for who I really was. The mask I had worn for so long, strong, capable, and vulnerable, was suffocating me. And it wasn't just exhausting to maintain, it was killing my spirit. When the sun finally broke through the window, I knew I couldn't continue like this. I had to face myself without the mask, without the accolades, without the need to prove anything. I didn't know how to start. But for the first time, I felt the possibility of peace, a peace that wasn't tied to achievements. Ethan's words replayed in my mind. Real peace doesn't come from control. It comes from acceptance. It wasn't about giving up my ambitions or abandoning my goals. It was about accepting that I didn't have to be perfect to be worthy. And that realization felt like the first honest breath I had taken in years. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I had been turned inside out. Ethan's words had cracked something open. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was this nagging feeling that wouldn't leave me alone. It was as if I had seen myself for the first time, and I wasn't sure if I liked what I saw. Usually I'd jump right into my morning routine, coffee, emails, a quick workout, and then straight to the office. But today I just sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the sunlight filtering through the blinds. Why did Ethan's question bother me so much? Why did being asked if I was happy make me feel so exposed? I knew I couldn't ignore it. For so long, I'd been moving so fast that I hadn't stopped to think about where I was going or why. Was I really living for myself? Or was I just performing a role, convincing everyone, including myself, that I was in control? Later that day, I decided to visit Ethan. I needed answers. When I arrived, he was sitting on a small porch, a cup of tea in his hands, surrounded by plants that seemed as calm as he was. Before I could even say a word, he gestured for me to sit down. It felt comforting somehow, like I was stepping into a space where nothing was expected of me. I didn't know how to start, so I just blurted it out. "Why did you ask me if I was happy?" Ethan didn't seem surprised. He just nodded and took a sip of his tea. "Because you look tired. Not just physically, your soul looked tired." His words hit harder than I expected. I was silent for a moment, unsure how to respond. I wanted to tell him that he was wrong, that I was just stressed from work, but deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. I looked down at my hands, feeling a strange sense of vulnerability. "Why do I always feel like I'm chasing something that doesn't exist?" I asked quietly. Ethan set his cup down, leaning forward. "Because you're looking for peace in places where it doesn't live," he replied. "You've convinced yourself that once you achieve enough, you'll feel complete. But what if peace isn't something you earn? What if it's something you realize you already have?" I felt a sudden rush of frustration. How am I supposed to believe that when everything I've worked for depends on being the best? If I slow down, if I stop pushing, everything falls apart. Ethan just smiled. "That's the illusion of control. You've built your life like a house of cards, and the slightest breeze threatens to topple it. But real strength doesn't come from holding everything in place. It comes from standing firm even when things fall apart." His words lingered, but I couldn't fully grasp them. I couldn't understand how I could just let go and still keep my life together, seeing my confusion. Ethan asked me a simple question: "What are you most afraid of?" The answer came to me without thinking: failure. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. It wasn't just failure in the professional sense. It was the fear of not being enough, of being seen as a disappointment. Ethan nodded as if he had expected that answer. "That fear, does it come from you or from the expectations you've been carrying your whole life?" I didn't know how to respond. Maybe it was both. Maybe it was neither. All I knew was that the fear was there, rooted deep inside me. He continued, "Sometimes we inherit fears without even realizing it. We adopt the beliefs of those who raised us, who shaped us, and we think they're our own, but they're not." I thought about my father, how his approval had been the measure of my success for as long as I could remember. He had always been distant, only showing pride when I brought home awards or accolades. So I kept collecting them, hoping one day it would be enough. But it never was. No matter how much I achieved, it felt like nothing more than a fleeting nod of approval. I had never stopped to ask myself if I wanted any of it. I took a deep breath. "So what do I do?" I asked, feeling like a child again, seeking guidance. Ethan leaned back, his gaze soft but unwavering. "You have to make peace with the part of you that's afraid to fail. Instead of running from it, face it, sit with it. Understand that it doesn't define you. You are not your achievements. You are not your failures. You are the one who experiences both and still stands." I tried to imagine that, being at peace regardless of the outcome. It sounded impossible. Ethan seemed to sense my doubt. "It's not about giving up ambition. It's about not letting ambition be the only thing that defines your worth." There's a difference between striving for excellence and being controlled by the need to prove yourself. I sat there letting his words sink in. Maybe I didn't have to hold everything so tightly. Maybe I could pursue success without it defining my entire existence. I didn't have all the answers, but for the first time I felt like I was seeing the problem clearly. I wasn't just afraid of failure. I was afraid of being seen as anything less than perfect. And that fear had built a prison around me. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I knew this was only the beginning. Letting go of the need to control everything wouldn't happen overnight, but I was willing to try. To take one step back and allow myself to breathe, even if it felt uncomfortable. To look at my own reflection without the mask of perfection. That evening as I walked home, I felt a strange lightness, as if a small part of the burden had been lifted. Ethan's words echoed in my mind. Real strength comes from standing firm even when things fall apart. I wasn't sure how I'd put it into practice, but for the first time I wasn't afraid to try. I realized that courage wasn't just about pushing forward. Sometimes it was about standing still and letting yourself feel what you've been avoiding for so long. Maybe peace wasn't something I had to earn. Maybe it was something I just had to recognize. And as I took that thought with me, I knew that I had just taken the first real step towards freedom. Days passed, but my mind kept circling back to that conversation with Ethan. His words had a way of sticking with me like a melody that refused to leave my head. It wasn't just what he said. It was the way he said it, calm and certain, like he had already been through the fire and come out the other side. I couldn't help but wonder, what did he know that I didn't? At the office, I tried to bury myself in work, emails, meetings, spreadsheets, the usual grind. But even in the middle of a conference call, my thoughts kept drifting. I started noticing things I hadn't before: the forced smiles, the subtle competition, the quiet desperation behind every polished presentation. Was everyone here just pretending like I was? Were they too fighting a silent battle to feel worthy? One evening after another 12-hour day, I sat in my office alone, the city lights flickering through the window. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was trapped in a routine I didn't remember choosing. I reached for my phone and dialed Ethan. He picked up almost immediately. "Can we meet?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course," he replied. "My place," I agreed, and left the office without looking back. When I arrived, Ethan was tending to his garden. He looked so peaceful, digging his hands into the soil. I envied that calm. "How do you do it?" I blurted out before I even sat down. He looked up, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Do what?" "Stay so balanced, unaffected. It's like nothing bothers you." He smiled softly. "It's not that nothing bothers me," he said. "It's that I don't let the bother control me." I didn't know what to make of that. How can you just decide that, I asked, feeling a bit defensive. He gestured for me to sit on the bench next to him. "It's not about deciding. It's about understanding. Most people spend their lives reacting like puppets pulled by strings they can't see. They think they're in control, but they're just responding to impulses, fears, desires. The trick is to see the strings before they move you." I thought about that, the idea of being moved without knowing why. I'd always thought of myself as decisive in control, but maybe I was just reacting to something I didn't understand. "What strings are you talking about?" I asked. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he pulled out a small notepad from his pocket. "Write down your 3 biggest fears," he said. At first, I didn't want to. It felt too vulnerable, too exposed, but I trusted Ethan, so I did it. Failure. Rejection, being forgotten. I handed him the notepad and he just looked at it without reading. "Now tell me, are these fears truly yours, or did someone hand them to you?" I froze, unsure how to respond. "What do you mean?" Ethan leaned back, looking at the sky as if searching for the right words. "Sometimes we adopt fears from those who raise us, those who shape us. A father who never approved, a mentor who expected perfection. We carry those expectations without questioning them, but are they really ours?" His words hit hard. I had never considered that my fears might not belong to me. They felt like mine. They shaped my life, my choices. But were they really a part of who I was, or had I just inherited them like old worn-out hand-me-downs? I thought about my father, how he never settled for anything less than perfection. His approval was scarce reserved only for the grandest achievements, and even then it was fleeting. Maybe I had been chasing something that wasn't even mine to chase. Maybe I was trying to fill a void that didn't belong to me. Ethan watched me closely as if sensing the storm inside. The thing about shadows, he said, is that they're just parts of you haven't learned to accept. When you deny them, they control you. When you recognize them, they lose their power. I didn't fully understand it yet, but I could feel the weight of his words. I had been pushing against myself for so long that I didn't know how to let go. What do I do with these fears? I asked, feeling almost desperate. Ethan placed a hand on my shoulder. Sit with them. Acknowledge them without judgment. Instead of running from them, listen to what they're telling you. They're not your enemy. They're just unspoken truths. That night I went home and did something I hadn't done in years. I sat in silence. No distractions, no tasks, just me and my thoughts. It felt strange, almost uncomfortable, like standing on the edge of a cliff, but I didn't turn away. I thought about my fear of failure and how it had driven every decision I made. Was I truly afraid of failing, or was I afraid of being seen as a failure? There was a difference, and I needed to know which one I was battling. I sat there for hours, letting memories come and go, moments of success that felt empty, failures that crushed me more than they should have. All because I wasn't fighting the event itself. I was fighting the label. Ethan's words played in my mind. Maybe peace wasn't about eliminating fear. Maybe it was about accepting that fear would always be there, just without letting it take the wheel. Eventually, I fell asleep on the couch, but for the first time in a long while, my sleep was deep and undisturbed. When I woke up, I didn't feel completely transformed, but I did feel different, lighter somehow. It wasn't a grand epiphany, just a small, quiet sense of clarity. Maybe the real battle wasn't against the world or the expectations placed on me. Maybe it was against the part of me that had been too afraid to just be human. As I made coffee, I looked out the window at the city below. For once, it didn't feel like it was swallowing me whole. It just felt there, not a threat, not a challenge. It's just a place I existed in, and that was enough for now. The phone buzzed with emails, reminders, obligations. But I didn't rush. I took a deep breath and reminded myself that I didn't need to be perfect today. I just needed to be real. And that, for the first time in a long while, felt possible. Maybe this was the start of something new. Not a perfect life, but an honest one. And somehow that felt like a better goal to strive for. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the sense that something fundamental had shifted. It wasn't like a light switch being flipped, more like a slow, steady dawn after a long night. I started noticing my reactions, how quick I was to prove myself, to jump into conversations just to sound competent. I caught myself over-explaining my successes, almost begging for validation without realizing it. I could see it now, how deeply I craved acknowledgement and how that craving had shaped so much of my life. But knowing it didn't make it disappear. It was still there, gnawing at me every time I hesitated, every time I saw someone else praised for their work. Old habits don't just vanish because you finally see them, but maybe that was the point. Seeing was the first step. After all, how could I change something I hadn't even acknowledged before? One afternoon back at the office, I found myself sitting in a meeting. The room was filled with colleagues discussing a new project, and I noticed something strange. Usually I would have been at the forefront, directing the conversation, making sure my ideas were the loudest. But this time I just listened, not passively but intentionally. I watched how people leaned in when someone spoke with conviction, how tension filled the room when ideas clashed. And I realized I wasn't the only one desperate for validation. Everyone here was performing in their own way. It wasn't just me. We were all playing roles, hoping someone would finally say, "You're enough." After the meeting, my boss pulled me aside. He raised an eyebrow, almost amused. "You were quieter than usual," he remarked. I shrugged. "Just listening," I replied. He nodded slowly. Sometimes that's more powerful than speaking. I didn't know whether he meant it as a compliment or a critique, but I didn't care. For once, I wasn't analyzing his reaction, trying to gauge if I had impressed him. I just took it for what it was, an observation. Nothing more. That evening, I walked home instead of taking a cab. The city around me seemed different, more alive, more vivid. Maybe I had just been too wrapped up in my own thoughts to notice before. The air felt fresher, and even the noise didn't seem as overwhelming. I passed by a park where a group of kids played soccer, laughing without a care in the world. For a moment, I felt envious. When had I last felt that free? When had I last done something purely for the joy of it? As I reached my apartment, my phone buzzed. It was Ethan. He had sent me a short message. Remember, you don't need permission to be yourself. I couldn't help but smile. It was a simple truth, but one I had overlooked for so long. I decided to call him, and as always, he picked up right away. I began. I think I'm starting to get it. It's not about eliminating my fears. It's about recognizing them without letting them control me. Ethan chuckled softly. Exactly. It's not about becoming fearless. It's about not being ruled by fear. Big difference. We talked for a while, and he shared something that surprised me. You know, Alex, I used to be just like you, always chasing something, success or recognition, the next big thing. It took me years to realize I wasn't actually chasing those things. I was running from myself. His words struck a chord. It made sense, pushing forward without ever looking back, afraid of what might catch up. Did you ever figure out what you were running from? I asked. He was quiet for a moment. My own reflection, he admitted. I didn't want to see how tired I looked. I didn't want to admit that I was empty. But once I did, everything changed, not overnight, but gradually. Little by little, I stopped running. That night, I sat on my couch and let his words sink in. Maybe that's what I had been doing all along. Running from the parts of myself I didn't like, pretending they didn't exist. But shadows don't disappear. Just because you ignore them, they follow you, cling to you, and only grow darker the more you deny them. I thought back to when I was a kid, always trying to make my father proud. He was a man who never settled for anything less than perfection, and I learned to mirror that mindset. Mistakes weren't lessons, they were failures, and failures were unacceptable. Maybe that's why I had built this perfect facade, why I had pushed myself so hard. I wasn't just trying to succeed, I was trying to protect myself from the shame of being imperfect. I took out my journal, something I hadn't touched in years. At the top of the page, I wrote, "What am I running from?" The pen hovered over the paper as memories flooded in moments of doubt, fear, and self-criticism. But instead of shoving them away, I wrote them down. Line after line, I filled the page with truths I had been too proud to admit. And with each word, I felt a bit lighter. When I finally put the pen down, I realized something. I had been carrying this weight for so long that I didn't remember what it felt like to let go. And even though it wasn't gnarly and it felt less suffocating just because I had acknowledged it, I sat back and took a deep breath. For the first time, I wasn't trying to fix myself. I was just letting myself be, and that was enough. As I closed the journal, I knew there was more work to do, more truths to face, more shadows to confront. But for now, I felt okay. Not perfect, not completely healed, but okay. And that was more than I had felt in a long time. Maybe this was what Ethan meant. Real strength wasn't about never falling. It was about getting up without shame when you did. I wasn't fixed, but I was on my way, and that felt like a victory. Maybe one day I would look in the mirror and see not just the man I was trying to be, but the man I already was, flawed, resilient, and finally at peace with the person looking back. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. Not to my father, not to my colleagues, not even to myself. I just needed to keep moving forward one step at a time, accepting that it was okay to not have all the answers. After all, strength wasn't in knowing everything. It was in the courage to keep learning, keep growing, and keep facing myself, shadow and all. As the weeks passed, I kept practicing what Ethan had taught me, sitting with my thoughts, letting them come without judgment. It wasn't easy. Sometimes I'd catch myself slipping back into old habits, striving too hard, pushing myself to be flawless. But each time I'd pause and take a deep breath, reminding myself that I didn't need to perform to be worthy. I could just be, and that was enough. One day at the office, a new project landed on my desk. It was big, bigger than anything I'd handled before. Normally, I'd have thrown myself into it, head first, trying to impress everyone from the start. But this time, I did something different. I called a team meeting, not to dictate, but to listen. I asked for ideas before offering mine, genuinely curious about what they thought. At first, my colleagues seemed surprised. They were used to me leading with authority, not asking for input. But gradually, they warmed up, sharing ideas with a confidence I hadn't seen before. I realized then that control wasn't just about dominance. Sometimes it was about letting others step forward instead of proving I was the smartest person in the room. I was creating a space where everyone felt valued, and surprisingly, that took more courage than I expected. It wasn't just about loosening my grip. It was about trusting that things could work even if I wasn't controlling every detail. After the meeting, my boss stopped by my office. He leaned against the door frame, eyebrows raised. "That was different," he said. I nodded. "Just trying something new." He looked thoughtful. "I like it." The team seemed more engaged than usual. I smiled, feeling a quiet satisfaction. Maybe change wasn't so bad after all. But the real test came later that week. I was scheduled to present the project proposal to the executive board. This was usually where I shined: polished slides, confident delivery, no room for error. But this time I approached it differently. I didn't obsess over the details or rehearse for hours. Instead, I focused on being genuine, sharing the vision, not just the data. When I stood in front of the board, I didn't feel the usual pressure to be perfect. I just spoke honestly, emphasizing the collaborative effort and the team's collective ideas. When it was over, the room was quiet for a moment. Then, to my surprise, the board members nodded, some even smiling. One of them, a senior executive I rarely spoke to, said, "It's refreshing to see such transparency. You didn't just sell the idea. You made us believe in it." I felt a warmth spreading through me. Pride, but not the kind I used to chase. This was different. It wasn't about being praised. It was about being real. After the meeting, I found a quiet spot in the building's atrium, surrounded by plants and natural light. I took a deep breath, letting the tension drain from my shoulders. For once, I wasn't analyzing every word I had said. I wasn't worrying about how I was perceived. I was just content. It was a strange, almost unfamiliar feeling, but I didn't want to push it away. I let it stay, reminding myself that this was what I had been searching for: not perfection, but peace. Later that day, I called Ethan to share how it went. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he just said, "That's progress." I couldn't help but laugh. "That's it. No philosophical insight." Ethan chuckled. "Sometimes progress speaks for itself." That evening, I found myself reflecting on why this felt so significant. It wasn't just that I had done something new. It was that I had dared to let go of my need to control the outcome. I wasn't trying to manipulate every variable to ensure success. I was just being honest, both with the board and with myself, and that honesty felt liberating. As the sun set, I decided to take a walk through the city. The air was crisp, the sidewalks bustling with people heading home. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was competing with the world. I wasn't in a race to prove anything. I was just present, and it felt good. I found myself at a small park bench, watching a street performer play the violin. The music was haunting, beautiful, full of emotion. A small crowd had gathered, but no one seemed in a hurry. For a moment, I just sat there, letting the melody wash over me, and I realized something important. I had been so focused on achieving, on pushing forward, that I had forgotten to just experience life, to feel it without trying to shape it. Maybe this was what Ethan meant about real freedom. Not the absence of challenges, but the presence of acceptance. Letting life unfold without needing to control at every moment. I pulled out my phone and texted Ethan, "I think I get it now. It's not about having no fear. It's about living." Despite it, his reply was almost immediate. "Exactly. You're learning to dance with your shadows instead of fighting them." As I headed home, I couldn't help but feel grateful. Grateful that I had questioned my old patterns. Grateful that I had met someone who challenged my perspective without judging me. And grateful that I had finally given myself permission to be imperfect. When I got back to my apartment, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I didn't see the flawless, confident leader I used to try so hard to portray. Instead, I saw someone more grounded, more real. And for once, I liked what I saw. I knew I still had work to do. There were habits to unlearn, fears to confront, but I wasn't in a rush. I was learning to let go of the need for constant progress and instead appreciate the quiet moments of growth. Before going to bed, I jotted down a simple thought in my journal. Strength isn't about never doubting yourself. It's about moving forward even when doubt is present. As I closed the book, I felt a sense of closure, not because my journey was complete, but because I had finally accepted that the journey itself was enough. That night, I slept peacefully without the usual restless thoughts chasing me into the dark. Maybe the next day would be hard. Maybe I would fall back into old habits, but I wasn't afraid of that possibility anymore. I knew I could face it when it came, and for now, that was more than enough. A few weeks passed and life didn't magically transform. I still woke up with doubts. Sometimes still felt the urge to chase perfection. But now when those thoughts surfaced, I didn't immediately react. I'd pause, take a breath, and remind myself that I didn't need to win every battle to be worthy. It was okay to let things unfold without forcing them into a neat control package. One evening as I was wrapping up at the office, I received an unexpected call from my father. We hadn't spoken much lately, mostly brief surface-level conversations. He rarely called just to talk, so when his name appeared on my screen, I hesitated. But then I answered. His voice was gruff, but not unfriendly. He wanted to know how I was doing, how work was going. I gave him the usual updates, projects, promotions, the expected milestones. He listened without saying much, and then in a rare moment of openness, he said, "I've been thinking about how hard I pushed you growing up." His words caught me off guard. I didn't know how to respond, he continued. I wanted you to be strong, to succeed. I guess I never realized how much pressure that put on you. I could hear the regret in his voice. It was subtle, almost hidden behind his usual stern tone, but it was there. A part of me wanted to lash out to tell him how that pressure had shaped me, made me feel like I was never enough. But instead I took a deep breath. I remembered what Ethan had said. Real strength comes from standing firm, even when emotions pull you in every direction. "It's okay, Dad," I said quietly. "I know you meant well. I just never knew how to tell you how much it affected me." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then he cleared his throat, almost as if brushing away his own vulnerability. "You've done well, Alex. Better than I ever expected. I'm proud of you." Hearing those words felt surreal. For so long, I had been chasing them, craving his approval. And now that I had it, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt at peace. After the call ended, I sat at my desk processing what had just happened. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had to prove myself anymore. It was strange, almost disorienting, but it was also freeing. My father's approval had been a driving force for so long that I hadn't stopped to consider what I wanted for myself. Now that the chase was over, I could finally focus on being who I was, not just who I thought I needed to be. That weekend, I visited Ethan. He was in his backyard tinkering with an old radio. When I told him about the call with my dad, he smiled. "Sounds like progress," he said. I nodded. It's weird though, I thought hearing him say he was proud would feel like winning, but it didn't. It just felt calm. Ethan nodded knowingly. "That's because you're not seeking it anymore. You're allowing it." There's a difference between needing validation and being open to it. We sat there in comfortable silence for a while, just listening to the hum of the radio and the distant sounds of the city. Finally, Ethan spoke up. "So what's next for you?" I hadn't really thought about it. For so long, my life had been about achieving, climbing, improving myself. Now that I wasn't chasing that anymore, I wasn't sure what came next. I just want to be more present, to stop rushing toward the next milestone and actually enjoy where I am, I admitted. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "That sounds a lot like freedom." I couldn't help but laugh. "Maybe it is." The next week at work, I noticed something had shifted. I wasn't as tense during meetings. I didn't feel the need to dominate every discussion. When one of my colleagues proposed an idea that conflicted with mine, I didn't push back out of reflex. Instead, I listened genuinely, considering his perspective. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about collaborating. And surprisingly, the project thrived because of it. One evening after a particularly productive day, I found myself at the same park where I had watched the street performer. Weeks before, he was there again playing the violin with the same raw passion. This time I didn't just observe, I let myself feel the music unguarded and unfiltered. It was beautiful, chaotic, imperfect, and that made it perfect. I realized that I had been living life like a rigid melody, controlled, calculated, predictable. But life was more like that violin performance full of unexpected notes, some harmonious, some dissonant, but all part of the same song. As I walked home, I couldn't help but smile at the simplicity of it. I wasn't afraid of imperfection anymore. I wasn't striving for flawless execution. I was just living. And that felt more fulfilling than any success I had chased before bed. I wrote one more entry in my journal. Freedom isn't about having no expectations. It's about not letting expectations dictate your worth. That thought stayed with me as I drifted off to sleep. Not every day would be easy, and not every moment would be profound. But I was done running from myself. I was done proving and perfecting. Instead, I would live, and that was enough. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter. The city seemed different, less like a battleground, and more like a place full of stories, each one unfolding at its own pace. I didn't feel the rush to keep up or stay ahead. For the first time, I was okay with just being part of it, moving at my own speed. That day at work, I made a decision. Instead of pursuing the next big promotion, I volunteered to mentor a new hire. Sharing what I had learned, not just about work, but about balance, felt more meaningful than any title. Watching her grow and gain confidence reminded me that success wasn't just about personal gain. Sometimes it was about helping others find their own path. As the weeks went by, I found myself reflecting less on what I hadn't achieved and more on what I was experiencing. I stopped measuring my worth by my productivity and started valuing the quieter moments, like sitting on that park bench, letting the music just exist. Maybe that's what real freedom felt like, letting go of the need to control everything and just allowing life to be. And as I continued on this journey, I knew that challenges would still come. There would be days when I doubted myself, when I felt the pull to chase perfection again. But I wasn't afraid of those days anymore. Because I knew that the strongest thing I could do wasn't to be flawless. It was to face my own imperfections without fear, to live honestly without the weight of constantly proving myself. To find peace not through achievement, but through acceptance. In the end, freedom wasn't about escaping my struggles. It was about embracing them, knowing that I didn't have to be in control of everything to be okay, and that was enough.